Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2019. Hope everybody had a great day today. We actually have noticed that with what's going on weather-wise across the U.S., that we seem to be in a period where things are settling down a little bit. And that actually makes a whole lot of sense considering the fact that we've been talking about the upper air pattern basically de-amplifying. And what we mean by that is when we talk about the jet stream pattern and you see the big ridges and troughs and ridges and more troughs, well, when you have them stretched out, amplified, they go pretty far down in the south, and then the ridge builds pretty far to the north. That's when you get a lot of action in the atmosphere. That is not the that is not a stable pattern at all. You're pulling extremes in one direction and another. We have been transitioning over into a much less amplified, or certainly, as I've been saying, de-amplified pattern, where instead of having these sort of deep troughs and strong ridges, you have very gentle troughs, or perhaps a deeper trough on one side, and then just kind of a sloping, gradual descent in terms of the jet stream going northwest to southeast. So that's caused the atmosphere to kind of settle down. There's not a whole lot of contrast in air masses going on across the country. You don't have big pools of cool air coming down into the plains and into the Rockies, triggering off severe weather like we did weeks over these past many weeks into the spring. So we're enjoying it. It's a good period to have that happen. And as far as the weather going forward in the east is concerned, this may have timed out pretty well. We had some downpours move through the northeast this morning, and they're moving off the New England coast this afternoon. So we're going to take a look at some of those after I kind of hide myself here and bring the window up full screen. And we'll start with, I'm going to start with the current weather map here with regards to temperatures, because there's something that I just want to point out. This is a reflexive time where forecasts, sometimes you'll hear forecasts that automatically will go to hot and humid, hot and humid, hot and humid. It's not always necessarily the case. And I point out that if you take a look, this is, of course, you're seeing Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but if you look at the dew points back through Pennsylvania, the dew points are fairly low. They're down in the mid-50s to around 60. So even though we had a bit of I sort of saw it as a warm front coming through, the dew points behind it are actually not all that high. They're pretty reasonable. So the humidity, while it won't exactly be as off-the-wall dry as it was this past weekend, is actually going to be okay tomorrow for the most part. Dew points will probably be running in most areas in the upper 50s to low 60s, with temperatures up in the middle to upper 80s. The sky, I don't think, will have that dirty look to it that it does when it gets pretty humid. It'll have a more of a blue sky look to it, and we should enjoy a fair amount of sunshine. I'm going to just say in general over the next several days that the vast majority of the time we are going to see relatively rain-free conditions, and when it comes to thunderstorms, they will be minimal and pop-up, maybe late Wednesday into Wednesday night, and then again maybe late Friday into Friday night. We actually have reasonable dew points all the way down through Virginia, down into the low 60s and into West Virginia, and over back through parts of Kentucky. So it's pretty decent. Temperatures up in the 80s. It's a nice stretch of summery weather that seems to be developing here, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to just pull away from this for the moment, and I'm going to bring up some of the usual maps that we start off with. Let me bring myself back up here. There we go. So I don't completely disappear out of the equation. All right, as far as watches and warnings are concerned, there's not a whole lot of them. And I'm going to put up the map. Usually I'll use this map when it's busy, but it's also good to put up when it's not. You've got two working severe thunderstorm watches up, one in southern Nebraska, northernmost Kansas, and into extreme northwestern Missouri, south western Iowa, and then another area of severe thunderstorm watches in and around southern Lake Michigan. And in fact, we noticed on the radar not too long ago that there was a pretty decent line of storms. Also some red flag warnings in parts of Nevada. Conditions have gotten a bit on the dry side there. And we've got a couple of places where we're working a few severe thunderstorm warnings or special marine warnings. That really is about it. It's very, very quiet. We don't have any excessive heat advisories or heat watches up or anything like that. It is one of the things that's happened, I think, with the fact that we've seen all this rainfall is, and it's a positive, it's actually cooling the daytime highs to a large degree. I think if we were in a very dry spring pattern with what's showing up in the atmosphere right now, we should easily be up into the low and mid 90s over the next several days. But instead, it's going to be more like mid 80s to near 90. I think the soil moisture being high is going to have some impact on high temperatures. So there are positives to all of this, and in some places there's a ton of soil moisture. Here's the 7-day rainfall map. Again, nothing really here that stands out. You've got some patchy areas that are showing 1 to 2 inch rainfalls across the Great Lakes and back through the northern plains and on up into parts of Montana. Also in Florida, particularly in South and West Florida, where we're seeing a patch there of rainfall amounts in excess of several inches over the next 7 days, in a small area along the Gulf Coast just south of and west of Galveston, right along the immediate coast as you head into the coastal bend. But everybody else is going to be pretty much at the mercy of whatever thunderstorms might come through, which is going to mean widely amounts that are going to have a rather wide variation and no widespread flooding rains anytime in the next 7 days. I don't think there's going to be very much complaining about that. Now here's the satellite loop, and on the lower left you can see the season's first tropical depression that is formed on the Pacific side. And the Hurricane Center is actually forecasting this to become a minimal tropical storm before it is forecasting it to get sheared apart. I got to tell you, when we'll look at this a little bit later. I don't know, the whole Pacific side. While there's a lot of convection around, there is also, I don't know, there just is the way it looks to me. It doesn't look like this is going to be a system that's going to rev up very much. And that's, of course, I have done that before in the Pacific, where you think something's not going to develop and suddenly you've got a category 2 or 3 hurricane. But there's a lot of shear going on, and the system from where it's tracking is going to be hitting cooler water relatively quickly. So if that's the case, then it really has got a very limited window of time in order to strengthen into a tropical storm. But there's a decent circulation here that's developed, so we'll see what happens. In the meantime, you notice across the United States, you've got the weather up in New England now, what came through the Northeast this morning. That's on up into eastern New England. We've got clouds streaming up from the Gulf Coast. There's some action going on in the western Gulf of Mexico. Nothing that I expect to become tropical, because this moisture is all going to be drawn northward. And some of the high clouds are streaming up northeastward into the Ohio Valley, and that really is about it. A little bit of action up in the northwest. Otherwise, it is very, very quiet, as I said. Severe weather risks tonight. The severe thunderstorm watches, as we showed you, 2 small areas inside a slight risk, and actually the watch box that is out to the west looks like it's been extended a little bit back through Nebraska. There's an enhanced area of severe weather, so that's probably the one place where you might see some heavy action. You've got this marginal risk area down in the Gulf states, and you can see the radar echoes along the Gulf Coast. That's been sitting there pretty much all day, so there's been some heavy rains going on right along the immediate coast. But this system is lying literally on the coastline itself, so there really isn't much room, nor are conditions really all that favorable for anything tropical to develop out of it. I know the question came up in the chat yesterday with Johnny Quest with regards to systems that start out as these, sort of large mesoscale thunderstorm events over land that drop into the Gulf of Mexico, and indeed every once in a while you can see something like that gradually evolve into something tropical over time. I don't think that this is one of those instances. Now, on the radar loop tonight, and as always, when you see radar and satellite loops here on the Joe Chaffee Weather Show, remember that it is dated. It's 6:09 Eastern Time. So if you're watching this later and you're under some kind of severe weather threat, please go to your local National Weather Service office forecast page, and you can find that easily by going to weather.gov, so you can get the latest weather information, weather radar, watches, warnings, and everything else that matters. But you've got the rain and downpours moving through eastern New England now. Not much else going on up and down the East Coast. And back to the Great Lakes, you've got that band of thunderstorms moving into Lake Michigan, and that's part of that one severe thunderstorm watch. And you've got that this east-west band that's through Nebraska and into Iowa with that other severe thunderstorm watch. And then you have this area from Louisiana down along the Texas coast. You can see it's kind of elongated northeast, southwest. It almost looks like an old frontal boundary or a mid-level trough that is just kind of settled in there. Some scattered precip up and down the Rockies and in parts of the Pacific Northwest. Otherwise, the Southwest and California doing quite well and nice and dry. And as far as severe weather risks are concerned for tomorrow, we're looking at a marginal risk up in western New York and western Pennsylvania. We have an upper trough that's going to be swinging through, and maybe the easternmost extent of that gets into the Catskills and the Poconos. And out west, you've got marginal risk through the plains, and then northwest through the Rockies, and on up into the northwest, where we've got two areas of slight risk. And just a quick jump over to day 3 will show us the risk area here, if it decides to plot. And come on, seriously? Well, for some reason it doesn't want to load. And I have to be honest, I didn't look at it before, so I don't remember exactly what it had. All right, doesn't want to load. Let's see if the mystery will resolve itself. Okay, so before we even look at the GFS surface, let's just to go over again what's happening in the upper air. And I think we'll take the wide North America view. I think that'll work better here. So here it is on, this is from the run from earlier today. So we're sitting with this ridge along the East Coast, troughing that goes from the lakes back to off the West Coast, but the upper low in the lakes is lifting up and out. And the flow, as we said, if you go back, you can see how amplified this is. Deep trough, strong ridge, deep trough, strong ridge, if you move across the U.S. and go out in the Atlantic. So over time, that's been de-amplifying. You'll notice the upper low that's in Labrador down to Newfoundland weakens here. So you lose the deep trough out in the Atlantic, which means that you're going to flatten the ridge out, but you also lose the deep troughing out in the Plains and Rockies. That lifts up into the Great Lakes and weakens too. You're left with one upper low that's sitting in the northwest. So it just basically lifts the jet stream up through the northern plains into New England, a west-northwest flow. And what we will be looking for is for something to come down in that flow that might alter things a bit as we go through the weekend. And in fact, what the models all have been keying on is the fact that this upper low that you see here, sitting over the southern shores of Hudson Bay, strengthens and finds its way into New England over the weekend. Now, this is going to create a flow from eastern Canada down into the Northeast and into the Mid-Atlantic states, and the result will be a shot of dry and somewhat cooler air to come in for late weekend and for the first part of next week. And as we move through next week, there's actually another arm that's going to try to come down. Although the GFS has sort of backed away from this, the European continues to hold on to the idea, and I think that that's the way to go. That there will be a second arm that comes down and kind of reinforces the first one for the latter part of next week. Let's see if the new GFS run went down back to this road. Do we have it out far enough? So there's the first trough. And you see there's kind of an upper low here. I'm going to go for the U.S. view. You'll see it better here. Do we have enough? We don't quite have enough, but right here, so being we're on the edge of this, it can't get too hot and it can't get too humid, but then you've got this trough that dives down into the east over the weekend into next week. Nice shot of reasonable air comes in. That pulls out, and there is a second shortwave trough that is up there in Canada. The European sort of keys on that a bit more over time and drops it in. You see it right there. Drops down over James Bay and into New England for the middle and latter part of next week, which would bring another push, maybe not quite as strong as the first one, but it does bring another push of drier air down the eastern seaboard for the 4th of July. I would generally say in a pattern like this going through next week that much of the time the chances for thunderstorms are going to be low, and on some days, probably for most places, it'll be non-existent. It's a relatively benign look that we have going forward, just in time for next week, which I know is a big vacation week for a lot of folks. Like to plan their vacations around the 4th of July and make next week one long weekend, starting actually with this weekend and taking it through all next week. Always used to kid around about the fact when the 4th of July falls on a Wednesday, that's easy to do. So you take the 2 days off before, the 2 days off after, since it's obvious it's not a movable holiday. The 4th of July is the 4th of July. This year it's on a Thursday. It takes a little bit more creative thinking, but I know a lot of folks will do that. So as we go forward the next couple of days, again, just some scattered showers and thunderstorms being indicated. I think we'll see it better probably if we use the radar presentation on the GFS rather than the actual precip. And here you have tomorrow, you got some stuff in upstate New York. Thursday, you have very little, if anything, going on east of the Mississippi. Just a couple of small patches there that develop down in the southern Appalachians. And then on Friday, you've got a disturbance that's going to move through the Northeast Friday night with a couple of storms. That goes out. Saturday, we wait for the cold front to the north, and it's lining up back across east-west from the St. Lawrence River back to Lake Superior. That's where the front is. I think actually there's going to be two lines. There probably will be some kind of lead weakening front or trough that will move toward the coast during Sunday morning, and then a stronger front that comes through later Sunday morning into Sunday afternoon. You see it here, and it might actually be a little bit later than that with some showers and storms. And then nice dry air comes in for Monday and Tuesday of next week. And you see the model, we don't have it out far enough, but you see showers lining up across the northern lake. So that's probably the second push that comes in for late Wednesday, the 4th of July, and maybe lasting into Friday. Just looking at the temperature anomalies to give you a flavor of all of this. So here's going into Sunday. You see that push of below average temperatures. That's our cool, relatively speaking. A trough like this would bring down a pretty solid shot of cooler air in another season. In the summertime, the anomalies are smaller. But still, you're talking about temperatures several degrees below average coming into the Northeast for Monday. Here's Monday afternoon, near or slightly below normal. Tuesday kind of gets back a little bit closer to normal. And then we're going to warm up ahead of the next cold front that should come down for later Wednesday night into Thursday. There's not a whole lot to really speak of here with regards to weather in general. We can take a look really fast at Europe, where the heat wave that is raging, and I'm just going to roll it back, at least in terms of the anomalies. You can see the departures from normal here, starting with Wednesday, the noontime temperatures. You see a large area of much above normal temperatures, running 10 degrees Celsius or more above average across France and Germany and Switzerland and on up into Austria and Poland. And then that hot area, that large area of anomalies running as much as 20 degrees above average Celsius down into France and Spain. And then that area gradually shrinks over time. I read an article today online. I think I accessed it through the Drudge Report. Somebody who decided to just basically cherry pick over all the, the weather that's been going on worldwide. Trying to, beg us all to do what we can because the weather is completely out of control. And as I'm reading through all of this, all I can think of is that there's not a single shred of meteorology in this at all. It was just utter mass hysteria that was in there. And I just thought it was kind of funny reading through some of the comments that were posted by folks who are older than 30, okay, that have actually have some life experience, especially some of them were farmers. And they just basically blew this person off. There is a lot of extreme weather going on. It has been for the last couple of months, but that's just sort of how it is. And I think we've reached a point now where you just got to be, you got to be really careful and very cynical about what you read, because it is there's oftentimes it's all based on hand wringing and mass hysteria, and there isn't a shred of science, and it comes at you at this, like someone's sort of screaming at you, and that's just a complete turnoff for me. Anyway, that's my small rant of the day. So here's the look over Europe. You've got this big upper high that extends from Africa on up, from the Sahara on up into Southwest Europe. So yeah, it's going to get very hot here. You also have this cutoff low sitting east of Portugal that's got this upper high sort of trapped. It's not built all the way up, by the way. You'll notice, there's a gentle northwest flow north of England and across northern Germany and Poland. And gradually this ridge is going to shift eastward and get flattened out to some degree over time. As you start getting into some troughing. So that's going to put an end to the extreme heat. The ridge is going to eventually flatten out, but it will mean for some rather hot temperatures. And from the standpoint of precip over the next 144 hours, really isn't much room for any when you've got this big upper high. So I'm guessing you've got your usual array of scattered showers and thunderstorms that develop in the afternoon and evening in some places, and that's about it. And by the way, through all of this, you'll notice that there's snow actually showing up in parts of Norway. I mean, I don't know how real that is, but that is snow, and that is colder air that's extending down probably from the Arctic down into that part of northwestern Europe. So look, the world, the line that I thought was really interesting in that whole diatribe that I read was the fact that when are we going to, we need to do something in order to bring weather back to normal. I would just really, that I thought was one of the most laughable lines I've ever read, because when you look at weather over the course of a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, you'll discover that the idea of what is quote-unquote normal doesn't really exist. You spend more of your time at the opposite ends of the extremes, and you kind of average those extremes out. You spend more of your time in a stretched rubber band that every once in a while just kind of comes back, and then it begins to stretch and pull out again, rather than staying in a straight line that only occasionally has these little bumps on the road. It was just, it was stupid. It was just stupid stuff. All right, let's come to the board. I don't know, I felt very controversial tonight. I felt like talking about this. Some things just really get on my nerves sometimes, and that's one of them, if only because of the fact that we spend a lot of our time, the vast majority of the time here, as all of you know, we focus on weather that is going on, and we don't try and drive opinions or agendas or have axe to grinds. We're not interested in redistribution of wealth from rich nations to poor nations. We want to look out the window and see what's going on and talk about it and forecast it and figure out where it's all going to go and what it means on a day-to-day basis. And that's all, that's always been my major aim, sorry. Were we not to have global warming, then 2/3 of North America will still be under 2 miles of glaciers. Well, yes, and look, it's all about marketing. As I have said, and I saw a few other. I saw one of my favorite guys on Twitter, which I'm not on very often, but I do every once in a while read Cranky Weather Guy. If you don't follow him, you should follow him. The guy really knows his stuff. He's a very good practical weather forecaster. He's not very big on using models, and he really is kind of, in a lot of ways, he's old school. And he sees things that I look at when he describes them, and then I look at it, it's like, oh yeah, he grasps a lot. He looks at a lot of the stuff that goes on worldwide. And he's made a point that I've made many times. If you're going to call it something, you're calling it, you call it, what do you call it? Climate change, global warming. But if you call it climate change, I ask the question, and no one seems to ever answer this, and that is change. Change implies that you're going from point A to point B. So can you define what point A is and what point B is? Because I don't really understand what are we changing from? What are we changing to? And I ask that as an honest question. I'm not asking that. I don't have any, as I said, I really don't care what way. It's not my thing. I just would like to know, what does that mean? Explain to me what that means. Give me a reference point. What are we changing from? And what are we changing to? And what do we want to change to? That's the thing I also don't get, is how are you going to orchestrate a change back to whatever it is that you supposedly want? I don't know. Somebody one day might give me the answer, but I don't know. Chuck Cardillo, remember, hey, you made it on the chat board, Chuck. Okay, so whatever you did tonight, you did it right. Remember, that reminds me, I do want to touch on this before I end it today. Remember in the 60s, some of the summers we had days in the hundreds and nighttime lows in the upper 80s and roads buckling. Of course, one of the things that we haven't had, at least here in my area, we haven't really had a long duration heat wave where temperatures have hit 100 degrees or higher for several days in a row. I could think back to, I forgot one of the heat waves in the 80s or 90s where it was something like 9 out of 13 days. I'm just trying to just sort of cherry pick numbers through my head. But it's been a long time since we've strung together a bunch of 100-degree days around here. LaGuardia notwithstanding, with the thermometer in being measured with jet exhaust on it. But I wonder what's going to happen the next time we have a heat wave like that, where we see temperatures topping out 100 or higher for 3, 4, 5 days in a row. What kind of screaming up and down what kind of mass hysteria screaming we're going to get from folks out there. Millennials, you haven't lived long enough to see a full cycle of weather. I haven't lived long enough to see a full cycle of weather. So, and I'm still learning about this stuff every day. It's humbling and it's mind-boggling all at the same time. Yes, Chuck. One of these days we're going to get one of those types of heat waves again, but hopefully not today, not this weekend or next week. Drama casters every season, Joe C. Lots of laughs. I hear you. It's just out of control. Timothy Veltman. You've been up. I was thinking about you, Tim. I haven't seen you in a while. Nice to see you back today. This is a time of year where you should take a break out of all of this. Everybody needs a little bit of downtime. Before you know it, the hurricane season's going to rev up. I understand what you're saying, but for example, sea levels have risen, so areas like a city in Delaware, like Lewes, could be underwater in 50 years. Okay, but Brandon, I would just say to you this: do we have, people have said that. I'd like to actually see some numbers. Has the sea level risen? Has the sea level actually risen along those coastal areas? And how much of that is driven by the infrastructure development? See, that's one of the things that never gets addressed here. There's been so much infrastructure development along coastal areas and areas that never should have been developed in the first place. The other thing I would just caution, Brandon, is that the numbers that are thrown out in 50 years, 20 years, I can remember this conversation beginning back in the middle 1980s. I was told in those conversations that much of the East Coast was going to be underwater by the year 2000. And, now it's 2010, then it's 2020, now it's 2050, now it's 2100. So I think there's a lot of things that we're still learning about that we don't really understand when it comes to all of this. And, so I asked the question about that because I think it's a legitimate question. How much sea level rise has there actually happened? Where, and there may very well be, I'm asking this very honestly, where has there been a huge change in what, folks from coastal areas that have had to abandon property or move inland? I'd like to know. I'm just kind of curious where that's changed. But again, infrastructure development has played a very, very big role. Neil Frank used to be head of the Hurricane Center when they were developing, a lot of developers were developing the east coast of Florida, and he had suggested, what, guys, why don't you just kind of leave the areas right near the immediate coast alone and just move your developments inland by a little bit, kind of leave a nice long stretch of undeveloped area near the coast. Well, they didn't listen to him. And, in some of those areas up and down the east coast of Florida, the beaches have shrunk, but you know what? They've put buildings and houses in places where they really shouldn't have put buildings and houses to begin with. There's a lot of politics involved too, so you got to be really careful with respect to that. Okay, so let me just say two things. First off, I just remembered I forgot to do the tropical depression, and I do have satellites of that. So let's just take a look. And this could be, I believe, the first name on the Pacific side is Alvin. Alvin. Okay, you got a quick look there at S&P futures. So here's the satellite view. I had to use the old satellite views of this because of the fact that the new GO 17, one picture it's on the far left side and one picture it's on the far right side. So here it's a little bit off the far right side, but you can see the rotation of this system. It's well off the coast of Mexico. It's moving westward, and before too long it's going to be north of 15 degrees north. So it really has a very limited time as far as development is concerned. And I have the other shot. It's on the extreme far center left, coming westward on the GOES 16, on the GOES 17, moving east. If you go north and west off Baja California, and there's a lot of low clouds out there, so it's not going to be long before this thing winds up getting up into colder water. But at least the Pacific finally woke up. It's the first tropical depression of the season in what is going to wind up being either the third late starting season or the second latest starting season on the Pacific side since the satellite era began. Okay, here's the other thing, and this is something that I wanted to talk about. This is something that is mentioned by a number of you when it comes to getting notifications about when I'm going, when I'm up on the live stream. You get them sometimes, you don't get them on others. I did get something from YouTube for creators, which is what they consider me, where they address this issue of notifications. And the way YouTube is set up, and if you think about it, it's quite daunting. But for every second of every minute of every day, as videos are being uploaded to YouTube, they are sending out billions and billions of notifications worldwide. And sometimes when you get someone that's really popular, where they have millions of followers and they put up a video, you suddenly, the system kind of gets strained. So you get these notifications go out slowly. But one thing that they did say that what you should make sure you have to do the following. First off, make sure that you are logged into your YouTube page, okay, with your Gmail address. And when you're there, make sure your notifications are turned on, and you want to make sure that the notifications are turned on to all, so that you will get them. Now, the other thing you got to do is you got to go on your phone, okay? You have to go on your phone, and if you have the YouTube app, I guess you have to make sure that the notifications are turned on in the YouTube app, and you have to also go make sure that notifications are turned on by going deeper into the settings of your phone and making sure that they're on, because if any one of those things is turned off, that is going to prevent you from getting notifications. So just bear that in mind. You got to do it on the YouTube page. Make sure you're logged into the YouTube page, and on your phone, you want to make sure any YouTube app notifications are turned on, and on the phone itself, that the ability for notifications is turned on. And that should resolve it, although there will be instances where you may get the notifications late. That's a system problem with YouTube, and it's not mine. So I just wanted to let you know, because that's one thing a lot of folks tell me, hey, I have it set for notifications, and I'm not getting them. Well, it's a three-prong approach when it comes to that. Okay, so let's leave it at that for today. Let me also, I just want to let you know ahead of time, I'll just give you a heads up, not next week, but the week after that, so the week of July the 8th, okay, I am going to be camping for a week. I am told that there is a signal there up where I'm going, way upstate New York, but I've also been told by people that there is no signal there. So I'm just giving you guys a heads up that there might be a stretch of days there where I may not be live streaming, and that would be in 2 weeks. Okay, so just putting a hint out there. In the meantime, I will be doing the morning show, Weather in 5 days in 5 minutes. So look for that every morning, and tomorrow night we'll be back with our regular live stream, either at 6 o'clock or at 7 o'clock Eastern time, depending on what kind of weather we have going on. All right, have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you sitting through my little rant there. Good night, everyone.